Hello, everybody. Welcome back. Today's date is August 9th, 2020. It's Sunday. And yesterday, Trump passed four executive orders. Yesterday being Saturday, August 8th. The four executive orders are a $400 increase to the current unemployment that people receive. So previously it was $600. So this is being brought down by $200 to $400. So this has been something that's been talked about in Congress for a long time. Something has been trying to be negotiated. How are we going to appropriate funds for unemployment? Are we going to continue with the $600? And Trump has just come out and he's pretty much subverted our whole process that we have for passing legislation and allocating funds for things. And he said, not only are we doing a $400 unemployment uh, increase as opposed to the $600, he's also extending a moratorium on people's rent and mortgage payments. He is also deferring student loans for an indefinite time, and he's also cutting people's payroll taxes. Um, and so all of these things, again, these were all executive orders that were signed yesterday, and I agree that all of these things need to have been done. There needed to have been an increase in unemployment um, because of what we're going through right now. There needed to be a moratorium on rent and mortgage, and there needed to. I mean, we should cancel student debt altogether, but it's good that we are at least. I mean, it's good. This is as good as we can expect from Republicans that they would defer payments from student loans for the time being. But the thing I do have, and these are all good things, and I agree with all of these things as policy, right? Do I agree that is this the way we pass things through executive order? We'll talk about it. But um, I don't agree with the payroll tax cut. Now, the reason why is because we use our payroll taxes as employees to pay for things like Social Security and Medicare. And so by cutting these taxes, yes, we are putting more money, slightly more money into the pockets of people making less than $100,000 a year. But we're also drastically cutting the funding for Social Security and Medicaid or Medicare, which rely on these things. So when it comes time for these people to retire, there might be less money in the funds, or there will be less money in the funds for people now who are trying to. Well, I mean, there's money in the reserves already, but it will kneecap Social Security and Medicare for the time being, for as long as this is enacted, which Republicans have been trying to do for a long time. Now, the payroll tax has been something that was trying to be passed through Congress. Even Republicans amongst themselves were fighting it. Obviously, Democrats are not fans of this. They want to do stimulus, and they want to keep the current unemployment benefits. And they know that cutting the payroll taxes hurts Social Security and Medicare. Uh, so they were opposed to this, but there were even people within the Republican Party who were opposed to this. This wasn't something that they all came to the consensus over. The typical Trump sycophants, though, because this is something that Trump was talking about. He talked about doing this through executive order for a long time. Like Dan Crenshaw, they were all in favor of this, and they were all on social media lying, saying, actually, no, this doesn't hurt Social Security and Medicare, without giving any sort of explanation at all. So Republicans were conflicted on doing that, but Trump has passed all that anyway and done it himself. And he's doing these executive orders because he thinks it'll be good for his reelection. Honestly, though, Congress has been in session for weeks, and they have not gotten a single thing passed. This is all just arguing about the Democrats want this much. Even Republicans say this, and there is some truth to it that Democrats come to the table, and we're going to talk about that in our next segment. Democrats come to the table wanting certain things, and all Republicans do is they just want less than what the Democrats want. Ted Cruz actually spoke about this. He said pretty much what's happening in Congress is the Democrats want something, and what the Republicans want is all the numbers that the Democrats want divided by three, and there's no actual other thing that they want to do other than just to subvert what the Democrats' wishes. And so Trump thinks this is going to be good for his reelection, and it might honestly be, like I said, because there's just so much holding up Congress and passing any sort of stimulus for the economy right now. and he feels that. This is my opinion. He feels that if they don't get something passed soon, it's going to be a bad reflection on him. So even if these don't pass, these what's it called, executive orders, because it's not entirely clear that he has the authority to actually do all of these things, he can at least come out and say, well, at least I tried to do these things and it didn't work, and the Democrats didn't want it because of whatever reason. And this is good for short-term gains, and it might actually, if the payroll tax in particular gets passed, it might actually be good for a lot of Americans. It might increase their confidence in Trump and increase their likelihood to vote for Trump if they see the extra money in their bank account, and for the time being, in the short term, and then being able to attribute that to Trump, that might be good for Trump in his reelection. But again, like I said, in the long term, this will be bad for Social Security and Medicare. And an economic advisor to the president, Larry Kudlow, actually said, over the next few weeks, this will essentially be like a $1,200 stimulus check. The payroll taxes saying, after a while, he said it will average out to about $1,200 a person over the next few weeks. He doesn't lay out an exact timeline, and he presents no data other than him just saying this. But this is obviously a reach by people within the Trump administration to try to say, well, in reality, we don't need a stimulus, so we don't need to do any more government spending. If we cut taxes, then the money that will be saved by Americans will essentially act as a stimulus itself. So they're trying to take the framing of a stimulus, saying, well, we're doing a sort of type of stimulus by not spending. And people, I mean, I don't know if anybody's falling for this stuff, but it seems like that's the narrative that's coming out of the Trump administration, saying this is essentially like a stimulus check, what we've done here. And this is just it's sort of, we're getting to the point where it's a culmination of everything that's been happening the whole year, and the things that haven't been happening. Again, it's just stagnation in Congress, and the election is coming up, and Trump is desperate to get anything through that will make him look good. Again, it's completely unclear if he can do any of these things he's done. These are all good. Well, except for the payroll tax cut, these are good things for the economy. The deferment of student loans, mortgage and rent moratorium, and $400 in increased unemployment. I'm in support of these things. It's very rare on this show. I think this might be the first time where I actually say this is something good that the president is doing. Although I disagree with the method in which he's doing it. And I'm not a legal expert, so I can't even say if it's legally right for him to do this. But in principle, I guess I sort of agree with these things. And whether it's through these executive orders, or I hope that if these don't pass, this really encourages Congress to try to pass these things anyway, because we need all of these things and more in reality. So this next story I've been kind of wanting to talk about for a long time, but I'm kind of hesitant because I'm just a young guy. I think I'm informed. I think I'm a kind of smart person. I think I have a fairly good understanding of what reality is and how to perceive what's going on in the world objectively. But I haven't seen many other people talk about this in particular, and that's that the Republican Party right now seems to be falling apart. Now, again, I could be maybe just completely wrong right now. If you are somebody who's a real political analyst out there, or if you just see things differently than I do, please let me know. I want this to be an open discussion, but this is just sort of my opinion and things that I've observed over the past few years or past few months, well, and years, actually. But it seems that the Republicans as a party have just been falling apart since Trump has sort of become the head of these things. And what I mean by that is when we came back in session and I'm talking mainly about Republicans in Congress, when we came back in session to try to see if we can get new stimulus, or or what we can do to help Americans during this crisis, Republicans had nothing. The Democrats came back, and look, I'm not a Democrat. The Democrats, I've said this in the past, they are complicit in a lot of the complacency and uh, bad things that have not been working for, just bad things, right? That could be anything, but just sort of the general badness, to not be too specific, of things that have caused our political process to not work for the average American, and just not work at all, pretty much, and essentially just these people meet not very often. They barely pass anything that actually helps anybody other than their lobbyists or anything. And I think the Democrats are completely complicit in that. But that being said, Democrats came back and they had a sort of coherent message. They wanted more stimulus. They wanted to keep the unemployment. And Republicans came back and I'm not saying Republicans had no plan, but there was no sort of coherent messaging that I could come across. Now, whether you agree with what the Democrats are doing, and you can disagree in that, and that's totally fine. But we can all see that at least they came back with a plan. At least they wanted something. Republicans came back and what did they want? It seemed all they wanted to do was the same sort of thing that that's been going on for years anyway, which is it's always been the case that Democrats come into meetings or into negotiations and they want huge spending lists, as Ted Cruz would put it, or the Republicans, and the Republicans just want uh, either less of that or deregulation or tax cuts or the typical sort of thing where it's like maintaining the status quo. But it seems like they can't come out and say the same thing they've sort of been saying for years because we know that the average American doesn't want to hear right now that we're passing tax cuts or that we're increasing the military budget or that we're increasing loans for large corporations or grants for corporations. And even on the payroll tax cut thing that I talked about in the previous segment with Trump, only some Republicans were behind this. Republicans were largely fractured on even this issue. So they had no clear messaging. Steve Mnuchin said that which is the Secretary of the Treasury appointed by Donald Trump, he said that he wanted a new stimulus and that we wouldn't be doing the payroll tax cut. And then that was several weeks ago, and now Trump comes out and he does the payroll tax cut by executive order. So it seems that within the Republican Party right now, there is conflict in what they want, and there is conflict in their messaging, and they can't even give their usual spin, like I said, about tax cuts or military, because that's not what people want right now. They know it's bad optics for them to come out in this moment and say, well, we just need to deregulate more. We just need to let things open up more. That's not what people want to hear. I mean, there are some people that will just be fine with whatever it is the Republicans decide to do, but they know it's not going to be popular for their party with the general populace. Like I said, Democrats want stimulus and unemployment. Ted Cruz, actually, which is the senator, one of the senators here in Texas, is the only one I see out, and maybe I'm just not aware. Again, this is all open for discussion, this whole segment. Like, if you think I'm totally wrong, just let me know. Ted Cruz is the only Republican I've seen in Congress with a clear messaging of what he wants. Right now, and he doesn't want stimulus. He doesn't want to pay people to stay at home, as he puts it. He wants to put a big emphasis on jobs. We need more jobs. We need to empower people to have jobs. We need to employ more people. We need to pass bills that will get more people working. And I guess not I guess I disagree with that needing to be our priority at the moment, especially considering the fact okay, jobs are good. We need more jobs. More jobs are always good. If they're good quality jobs, that's always good. More people working is good. But in a moment like this, we can have all the jobs in the world and people can hire. Like, let's say people can hire. Let's say people get hired and there are more jobs, but if nobody's showing up because they're afraid, then businesses are going to lose money. That's why people aren't hiring right now. That's why millions of people are unemployed, because the businesses just don't need that many people to work right now. No matter how many times we try to force businesses or encourage businesses to continue hiring people and paying their employees, our system is set up in a way where if it's not profitable to keep these employees, they're just not going to. And people aren't going to stores at the rates that they used to, or going spending money at the rates that they used to, because they are afraid of coronavirus. So people aren't hiring as often. But he's the only one with a coherent message, with a coherent, consistent message. He's saying that what's going on right now is because of lobbying. The what's going on, meaning what's not happening in Congress. There are no bills being passed. There's no real negotiations and consensus on both sides about what we need to do. Is because everybody is just listening to the lobbyists, and they're saying, well, if we're spending $1 trillion, I want my hand in the jar. Essentially, their lobbyists are telling their lobbyists are telling their Congress people that I want to be getting in on some of this. And you know what? These are all fair points. Again, that's totally fair. Again, both sides are complicit in sort of the horrible campaign finance system we have, and contributing to like the cronyistic, capitalistic uh, system that we have here in the United States. And it's totally fair to say we need more jobs and that this is getting stuck up because of lobbying. Again, I disagree that jobs need to be our priority, but at least Ted Cruz is the only one with a coherent message. Now I said Republicans had been falling apart since Trump. And the reason I said that is because even in the primary, if you remember back in 2016, the Republican primary, when they were when the Republicans were seeing who the nominee was going to be, people like Rand Paul and Ted Cruz were attacking President Trump, saying things like he's a divisive figure. He's really not that smart of a businessman. Obviously they're saying they're better, and Trump made personal attacks against both of these people, but now both of these people fall in line with him most of the time because they realize that if they are outspoken against Trump, it's going to fracture their party. And it's sort of telling that they aren't outspoken about Trump, in that it's telling that how weak of a position they are. Because if they were in a much stronger position, if they were more secure in the positioning of their party in our American political system, then they would just say what they want, and they wouldn't be as afraid to just vocalize their opinions, right? But because they know their party is in a weak state, and this is my opinion again, they if they put on these sort of shows of disagreement and saying, well, no, we need to stick to these values, and this is actually what we need to be doing, it's going to create the vision or the image that there is some fracturing, that they're falling apart. So since Donald Trump is essentially the de facto head of the Republican Party at the moment, they're all just going to fall in line with whatever he says. They're never going to be publicly outspoken against what he says. And I think that's very telling. Seeing what they had said in the past when Trump really had no political power and political influence, and at the level he does now to the Republican Party, look at how they were talking about Trump, they being people like Lindsey Graham, Ted Cruz, Mitch McConnell, Rand Paul, maybe Jeb Bush still doesn't like, it would still publicly speak out against Donald Trump, but all these other people who had previously said negative things, they all just fall in line, and it's because they know their party is fracturing. It's because they know Trump is riding on the culture war, and Republicans have been doing this for years, but Trump is so blatant about it, and he not only that, but he tries to push policies and goes against what the Republicans want to do. But because he's also riding on this sort of culture war thing, the Republicans aren't going to be publicly outspoken against them because they're afraid of their base. They're afraid of the Trumpist base, of the radical base who is literally only concerned with racist dog whistles and with these austerity programs that they think are somehow going to be good for them when they're making $50,000-$60,000 a year. And so these Republicans, these congressional Republicans, or these Republicans in Congress are afraid to speak out against Donald Trump because of the base and because of the Trumpist base who doesn't care about science, who doesn't care about reasoning, and just is totally bought into the culture war. And because they don't want to fracture their party, Republicans are put in a corner. And I've said this in the past. I mean, I wouldn't doubt if this continues. I mean, the worst thing for the Republican Party might be that Trump gets reelected, honestly, because after Trump is out, at least Republicans can go back to sort of hiding their racist and libertarian sort of ideas, and that would only help large corporations and their lobbyists and them personally, these that what they would call libertarian and freedom ideas. They can hide that behind their sort of intellectualism that they use to weaponize those sorts of ideas. Now it's not even, it's just straight up anti-intellectualism with Trump, and it's sort of becoming more obvious and blatant to people. So if Trump is out of office, they can sort of just go back to what they were doing before. I think it would actually be very good for the Republican Party if Joe Biden gets reelected, because they can go back to what they were doing in the past and sort of move slightly more to the left as the country is, without having to face the repercussions of what that would mean if somebody like Trump were still president. Obviously, they're still going to be on the right, uh, and it's not going to change fundamentally. But Republicans are going to have to switch on some issues because public opinion is changing, and uh, what's going on with what the Republicans want and what they've been wanting for decades, it's just not working, and it's not so obvious that what Republicans want these days. So this is just my analysis. This is just what I've observed about the world. If you disagree, let me know. If you don't think Republicans are falling apart, but this is what I see, and they could fall apart within the next few years completely. They could dissolve as a party, and I wouldn't doubt it. I wouldn't doubt it at all. So we absolutely need to talk about this Axios interview on HBO, and I'm sure you've already seen this, but this is just fantastic. We're just going to play a few clips and we're going to kind of talk about it a little bit. This is more for people who haven't seen this. I'm like, if you've already seen this, uh, you know, just stay anyway because it's hilarious, and these these clips really just show how any sort of basic pushback by any interviewer or follow-up questions or just on the spot calling him out for his BS, Trump can't handle it, and it's actually hilarious. But you might have gotten enough of this though, but I want to talk about it anyway because I know there's still some people out there who haven't seen it. So he first starts out. I'll first play this clip about. We're just gonna go through the highlights. I encourage you to watch the entire interview. It's on it's on HBO's YouTube channel. The interview is about 30 minutes long. Every moment of it is absolutely hilarious, though. Let's listen to this first one about 9 minutes in, where he's talking about testing and cases.
Excuse me, one thing I would say about testing. Because we test so much, we show cases. So we show many, many cases. We show tremendous number of. I know you're smiling when I say that.
No, but come on. I mean, I've heard you say this.
Other countries don't test like we do, so they don't show cases.
Just a couple of points on that. I wasn't going to continue on the testing, but you said it. So we're testing so much because it's spread so far in America.
We're testing so much because we had the ability to test.
Okay.
Because we came up with tests.
But South Korea.
Jonathan, we didn't even have a test. When I took over, we didn't even have a test. Now, in all fairness,
why would you have a test?
There was no test.
The virus
for
didn't
this.
exist. How would you have a test?
I was going to say,
okay.
There was no test for this new. We didn't have a test because there was no test.
Of course.
In a very short order, we got one test, we got another test.
It was broken, the first one.
Many of those tests are now obsolete because we've, it's called science, and all of a sudden something's better. But because we tested so many people, 55, 60 million people very soon, we get cases. You test, some kid has even just a little runny nose, it's a case. And then you report many cases. So we look like we have more cases than massive countries like China, which, by the way, doesn't report, as you know.
Well, I don't put any stock in China's figures.
The point is, because we are so much better at testing than any other country in the world, we show more cases.
So this is the typical Trump spin that he's been trying to push for a long time, and you can kind of see at the end there, Jonathan Swan is kind of flummoxed there. He's like, oh, okay, I know what you're saying, and I've heard this before. And he's visibly like, what are you talking about here? And I mean, this is easily explained away. I don't want to spend too much time on this because, I mean, I think we've spent enough time talking about this talking point on the show, but we're only doing more tests than other countries because this is still a problem. Our positivity rate is going up. Our hospitalization is going up. If we were doing millions of tests, which we are, we have done more tests than anyone else in the world, just on a pure numbers basis. In proportion to population, not so much, but in pure numbers on a purely how many tests, we have done more tests, but it's out of necessity. It's because we keep on. The more tests we do, the higher the positivity. If we were doing millions of more tests and the positivity were going down, then okay, it would be a fair point to say we're only finding more cases because we just are testing so much. But we are testing a lot, and we're finding an increase in cases. So it's good that we need to be testing more if the positivity is increasing. So I mean, I think everyone understands that. Unless you just don't want to understand it, I think everyone understands that. So here they start talking about the death figure.
cases.
The figure I look at is death. And death is going up now.
Okay,
And it's 1,000 a day.
If you look at death...
Yeah, it's going
let's
up
look.
again.
Let's look.
Daily death.
Take a look at some of these charts.
I'd love to.
We're going to look.
Let's look.
And if you look at death...
Yeah.
per-
It's started to go up
Here's
again.
one. Well, right here, the United States is lowest in numerous categories. We're lower than the world.
Lower than
We're
the
lower
world?
than
What is that?
Europe.
In
Look,
what?
look.
In what?
Take a look. Right here. Here's case death.
Oh, you're doing death as a proportion of cases. I'm talking about death as a proportion of population. That's where the US is really bad.
Well,
Much worse than South Korea, Germany, etc.
you can't do that. You have
Why
to go,
can't I do that?
You have to go by where. Look, here is the United States. You have to go by the cases. The cases.
Why
are
not
there.
as a proportion of
when
population?
we have somebody. What it says is when you have somebody that
Yeah.
where there's a case.
Oh, okay.
The people that live
Sure.
from
Oh.
those cases.
It's surely a relevant statistic to say if the US has X population and X percentage of death of that population
No,
versus
because you
South
have to
Korea.
go by the cases.
Well, look at South Korea,
If-
for example. 51 million population, 300 deaths. It's like, it's
You-
crazy
you don't
compared to
know
other
that.
countries. I do. It's
You
on the.
don't know
it's-
that.
You think they're faking their statistics, South Korea?
I
An
won't
advanced
get into
country?
that because I have a very good relationship
Yeah.
with the country, but you don't know that. And they have spikes. Look, here's
You gotta love what Trump says at the end there. I won't get into it because we have a good relationship with that country. So, would Trump be more willing to say blatant lies about a country if they weren't our ally? And obviously, we know that's the truth. They always lie about China and Russia with, crazy conspiracies about things, and he can just say sort of things about, China suppressing numbers, which they are. China, I'm not defending China at all. China did suppress numbers. They did suppress information. They violated people's human rights and civil liberties during their lockdown, the coronavirus. You're not going to find any defense of China on this channel, okay? But they can just sort of throw out these things and say these sort of off-the-cuff things about, well, there's general bad stuff happening in China because they don't have a good relationship with China. So that kind of gives you a window into, well, Trump is more willing to lie about a country if they're not a perceived ally of the United States. And so you gotta love when Trump was in the middle of that clip when Trump told Jonathan Swan, you can't do that. You can't look at the number because that number looks bad for us, right? So yes, we're doing more and more tests, and as a proportion of the amount of tests we're doing, our death rate is the lowest in the world. But we're needing to do more tests because more people are positive, and just as a proportion of how many people have died in the U.S. From coronavirus in proportion to the entire population, not with cases, and I'll explain why that doesn't make sense in a second. Not with cases, we are among the highest in the world. Now, okay, why doesn't it make sense to look at deaths per testing? So like Jonathan Swan said, South Korea has 300 deaths, and they are largely past this thing. They don't need to do tests at the capacity that they once did. So if you compare the not even just South Korea, just a country that was on top of this thing immediately, so like New Zealand or Germany. And so if you look at the amount of tests they were doing in the beginning and the amount of deaths they had, that number, it stays the same in proportion to the amount of tests. And it's higher than the United States because they got this thing under control very quickly, and the amount of tests that they did were not necessary to have been at such high level that we have here because they didn't spread as far, and they didn't have the treatments that we now do for coronavirus. So of course, if they did the majority of their tests in the past, and the people back then who didn't receive the modern treatments that we have now have died, then the death rate as a proportion of tests is obviously going to be a lot higher for them than us. But if you look at, well, how many people died in proportion to the whole population, it's a lot lower because they got this thing under control. They knew the areas that they needed to target, and they just took better precautions than we did. Now, this is kind of working against what Trump wants to do, though, in the way of, he said he wants to do less cases because the more cases we have, the more deaths we have. Well, if someone is so sick that they need to go to the hospital and they end up dying, then they're obviously going to be counted as a coronavirus case. So if we actually do decrease the amount of testing that we do, as Donald Trump has said he wanted to do in the past, it would actually make our case fatality rate a lot worse. And I wonder if at that point Trump might switch and say, well, actually now we need to look at the as a portion of the death as a portion of our population as opposed to the other one. I don't know if, I mean, it would have to be a very long time for the case fatality to look or for the death per capita rate to look better than the case fatality rate. But you know, you have to wonder if they just say whatever is most politically convenient. They look at the most politically convenient thing as opposed to saying, well, what's the thing that impacts Americans the most, and what's the most relevant statistic to look at, as Jonathan Swan said. Okay, so next, Trump makes a sort of bizarre claim about Florida.
Good thing, not a bad thing.
But-
The top, Jonathan.
If hospital
top
rates were
is
going down
cases.
and deaths were going down, I'd say terrific. You deserve to be praised for
Well, they
testing,
don't
but they're
even-
all going
you know,
up.
they very rarely talk-
60,000 Americans are in
If
hospital.
you watch the
1,000
news or
dying a
read the
day.
papers, they usually talk about new cases, new cases, new cases.
I'm talking about death.
Well, you look at
going
death.
up.
Death is way down from where it was.
It's 1,000 a
Death.
day. It was 2,500. It went down to 500. Now it's going up
Death,
again.
excuse me, where it was is much higher than where it is right now.
Went down, then it went up
spiked,
again.
But now it's going down again. It's
going
going
up.
down in Arizona. It's going down in Florida.
Nationally,
it's
it's
going
going
down
up.
in Texas. Take a look at this. These are the tests.
It's going down in Florida?
Yeah, it leveled out and it's going down. That's my report as of yesterday.
Anyway, Mr. President, if I could change.
So it is not going down in Florida. Recently, because of the hurricane, some places in Florida have needed to stop, not needed, but they stopped reporting their cases because, and there's been a decrease in testing and cases because people are just staying home and the access to testing is not what it is with the hurricane going on. But Florida is the epicenter of the world right now with coronavirus, at least in the developed world with coronavirus. So for Trump to make that claim that it's going down in Florida, again, he just says these things in passing. It doesn't matter to him. He can just make these sort of outrageous claims. And Jonathan Swad tried to call him out on it. He didn't have the numbers there immediately, but this doesn't pass the sniff test. Like, we know, like, this is BS. Like, he's lying to us. It's the epicenter of what's going on right now. So, and then Jonathan Swan asks Donald Trump if he reads, and listen to the way he answers this.
About it. It never reached my desk because
Do you read your written brief?
I do. I
Do you?
read a lot.
Really?
You know, I read a lot. They like to say I don't read. I read a lot.
Your daily
I
intelligence
comprehend
brief?
extraordinarily well, probably better than anybody that you've interviewed in a long time. I read a lot. I spend a lot of time at meetings. Usually it's once a day or at least 2 or 3 times a week intelligence.
'Cause this was apparently
talking
in your
about India,
brief.
talking about
Right.
with the problems with China, talking about so many different elements of the world.
Mm-hmm.
The world is a very angry place if you look all over the world.
So, like, no one believes this, right? Trump, no one who comprehends information well says, I comprehend information better than anyone you've spoken to in a long time. I read all the time. I read more than anyone you know. You know, if somebody's speaking like that, and we've all run into people like this in our life, right? We know they're lying. We know they're nobody who reads all the time, or nobody who has a lot of information that they need to consume at all times would talk like this. It's just such a bizarre way. Like, normal people don't talk this way. I comprehend information better than anyone you've spoken to in a long time. I read so much that it's just unbelievable the amount I read. You know, this is obviously someone who's lying. Like, and it's just hilarious. And this whole interview is just full of amazing things. Last thing though, he gets asked about the election results, which is a hot topic, and let's check that out.
You told Fox News recently that you couldn't say whether you'd accept the results of the 2020 election. What does that actually look like as the sitting president? I mean, it's unprecedented. What would
Well,
that actually look
Hillary
like?
Clinton never accepted
She-
him.
she
I mean,
conceded
went
on-
totally,
she conceded
still
on-
doesn't accept him, and she got
That's the
beaten
important
very
point.
easily.
That's the important point. She conceded on election night. Now, she grumbled about it and said all sorts of things.
Grumbled? She
Okay,
wrote books
fine.
about it.
She wrote books.
Don't use the word grumbled.
Fine, but-
she wrote books about it.
That's fine, but I'm
and
just...
she got beaten easily.
I get it. I get it. but
306 to 223.
I'm
That's a
not
lot.
disputing you beat Hillary Clinton.
That's a lot.
Listen, what I'm asking is you'll be the sitting president in the White House. What does that look like? Not
I'll
accepting...
tell you what it looks like.
Are you litigating?
Let me tell you what it looks like.
Okay.
So we have a new phenomena. It's called mail-in voting, where you send where a
New.
governor.
It's been here since the
it's
Civil
new
War.
in terms of
America's been-
the kind of millions and millions of ballots. They've never.
It'll
done
be
anything like
bigger
this.
this year because of the pandemic.
Bigger? Not bigger, massively bigger.
Yeah, because of the
So they're
pandemic.
going to send tens of millions of ballots to California, all over the place. Who's going to get them? I have a friend lives in Westchester County.
They send applications, not that.
His son passed away. He had a beautiful, wonderful son, young man, passed away 7 years ago. He called me. He said, "I just got a ballot
Probably an
for my
application.
son Robert.
Probably
He
an
died 7 years ago. Somebody got a ballot for a dog. Somebody got a ballot for something else. You got millions of ballots going. Nobody even knows where they're going. You look at some of the corruption having to do with universal mail-in voting. Absentee voting is okay. You have to apply. You have to go through a process.
You have to apply for mail-in.
Absentee
It's the
voting
same
is
thing.
good. Look,
Look,
they're
let's do
sending
concrete.
out-
Let's do concrete.
Jonathan, they're sending out
Applications.
governors
Download them off the
millions of ballots.
No, they're not.
There
It's
is-
applications. You can get them
There
off the
is
internet.
no way you can go through a mail-in vote without massive cheating.
Trump, isn't this just the best? I love it. I mean, before recording this right now, I've watched it, and this is fantastic. Trump is visibly uncomfortable with just the simplest, tiniest amount of pushback by Jonathan Swan, and he starts off by talking about Hillary Clinton. Jonathan pretty instantly shuts that down. And then he says this whole point about who was it? His friend who got a application or got a whatever for his, like, who knows if this story is even true, right? But okay, okay, I have to explain this because some people don't know. Some people don't know, and that's fine. If you don't know, that's okay. If maybe, right? Maybe he got somebody out there who's Trump's friend got an application or a voting card for their dead son, or maybe there are people out there who get absentee whatever for dead relatives. When you send that ballot in, if somebody were to send that ballot in trying to vote as a dead person, the county cross references these things. They don't just take the ballot and say, oh, this looks good, and then just throw it into the ballot box of the machine. They cross-reference these things with the lists of registered voters. They know who's deceased in a county, right? And then Trump says somebody got a ballot for their dog, right? And again, if Obama were to have said people were getting ballots for their dogs, it would have been the end. But this isn't going to make any headlines. No one cares. We've become desensitized to this stuff. Jonathan Swan, he's actually wrong here a little bit. He said, well, no, actually they're sending out applications. It's really on a state by state basis. We don't really have one election here in the United States on November 3rd, in the general election. What we really have is sort of like 50 different elections, and then those elections then report their information to the federal government, the Federal Elections Commission. So it's really on a state by state. Some states might be sending out applications to everybody. Some states will say you have to apply, and fears of getting coronavirus is a valid reason to request absentee. Some states say all registered voters are automatically approved for absentee voting. And so obviously Trump tries to make this fake distinction between mail-in voting and absentee voting when they're the exact same thing. You still have to either, like Jonathan said, apply, or you have to be a registered voter, and you send this information to your county elections office, and they cross-reference this data. There's so many points at which there's security for this thing. It's very difficult. Like I've explained in, I think it was my previous video. Go back and watch my previous video about mail-in voting, or it'll have mail-in voting in the title where I talked about this. It's actually really difficult to do mail-in voting fraud because there's so many levels of security. Again, watch this whole interview with Jonathan. It just amazing interview. Not amazing because Jonathan Swan didn't ask any particularly hard-hitting questions, and he gave the smallest amount of pushback. He didn't let Trump say anything ridiculous, and Trump can handle it. And it's the watch this whole. It's free on YouTube, Axios on HBO. Jonathan Swan, fantastic, just a great laugh, and not very. Don't watch this to get informed on anything. Just watch this to watch this to make Trump. Watch this to watch Trump make a fool of himself. Okay, well, thank you guys so much for watching. This came out a little bit late. Sorry about that. But we're gonna have another episode on Thursday, and then another one this weekend. And thank you so much.